Okay. Hello.
Hey, Chris is on mute because he's working on something.
Oh, okay. This time we watched Season 5, Episode 19, Outlaw of Gore.
A quick reminder that Mike and the bots look really good in boaters.
But first, some follow-up. In our last episode on Untamed Youth, we were talking about Eddie Cochran and the song he covered in tribute to his friends Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper, who died in an infamous plane crash. On Twitter, friend of the show Tim Lenner from the podcast The Fiasco Brothers Watch a Movie pointed to Just Like Eddie. That's a tribute to Eddie Cochran that was recorded by a guy who went by Hines and was produced by Joe Meek. Meek and Hines were both in the Tornadoes, the 60s group that created the spacey masterpiece, Telstar.
One of the things I've liked about doing this podcast is being introduced to new music that I haven't been exposed to. When I say new, I mean from eras past that somehow got by me.
Yeah, you gotta listen to something fresher than Pure Moods.
So, I mean, Telstar I do know about, but I didn't know about the Tornadoes, and it's a fun hole to roll down, just like with Esquivel a couple episodes ago. Fun to discover new things.
Yeah, no, it's always been good. Although I have to point to, have you ever heard the cover of Telstar by a band that's called The Skados?
No.
It's the best version of Telstar.
Oh, okay. Is it ska?
Yeah. And ordinarily I would not support such a thing. But this classic recording by The Skados features lyrics. It's probably one of the few times that Telstar has ever been given lyrics. And it's mostly the frontman bragging about how good Telstar is and how Sputnik sucks. I believe the lines, because I listened to this a lot when I first heard it. It was like, Telstar, you're my man. Sputnik, no sir. It's an absolute classic. So that's easily my favorite recording of Joe Meek's Telstar.
Very nice. Also, in our members-only Slack, which is available to everyone who supports us on Patreon, a conversation led to the realization that Robbie Rist, who is the kid who played Cousin Oliver on the Brady Bunch, as we discussed in our last episode, grew up to play Michelangelo in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
And if you're going to be a turtle, I mean, that's the one you want to be.
Yeah, he's obviously, well...
You want to be a party dude.
I could never understand why Michelangelo has a Californian accent and Raphael has...
a Brooklyn accent.
Yes.
Yeah, especially because they're supposed to be New York turtles. But you know what? I think that's just one of those things that stuck from the cartoon. What's really interesting about TMNT, as someone who only really liked it as a little kid and has since kind of like left it, but I have kind of a fondness for how kind of weird it is that this is an enduring legacy thing, is that it seems like every iteration of that property leaves its mark, and the definite mark on the cartoon, aside from perhaps Krang, is that Michelangelo sounds like Spicoli.
Right.
And it was just done that way. I think it's because Townsend Coleman, who is a voice actor, had to differentiate himself from the other actors. So he knew how to imitate Spicoli from Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And that stuck. So Michelangelo, even though the character voices for those other three are totally different in the other movies and the other shows and everything like that, Michelangelo always sounds like Spicoli. That has stuck.
Well, good job, Cousin Oliver.
And apparently he voices somebody in Naruto, but I haven't seen an anime more recent than My Neighbor Totoro, so I don't know anything about that.
Okay, well, with that out of the way, let's go to Gore. This time we watch Season 5, Episode 19, Outlaw, also known as Gore 2. College professor Tarl Cabot is having a hard time adjusting to life on Earth after his adventures on the planet of Gore. See previous movie, Gore. And he tries to drink away his sadness at the local watering hole. Unfortunately, a wannabe ladies' man named Watney, who's ostensibly Cabot's colleague, I do not believe this man completed a doctorate, keeps pestering him and insists that Cabot drive them to a second location in search for more receptive female prospects. On the way, however, Cabot's weird mood ring sends them back to Gore, much to the joy of Cabot. After sticking his elbows into a couple of baddies, he's welcomed as a hero and reunited with his love, Telena, the daughter of King Milanus of Koroba, which I guess is some kind of city-state. However, his arrival does not go over well with the head priest, Xenos, played by Jack Palance, nor Milanus' new wife, the superhero-attired Lara. The two of them start hatching a plan to dispose of the Earthman so that they can assume power. Lara stabs her husband to death, blames Cabot for the assassination, and seduces the openly slobbering Watney into corroborating her story. Cabot escapes into the desert with his little person sidekick, who, as far as I can tell, is never named in the movie. They soon discover that Lara is attempting to bring back slavery with a vengeance after her late husband's attempts to eradicate the practice. Cabot fights back by rescuing one particularly pretty slave girl from being sold. Good heroing, Cabot. Even the slavers are like, no biggie. Alas, any further opportunities he has to further disrupt the slave trade are curtailed when he and his traveling companions are captured by a bounty hunter and brought back to Koroba to face the new queen. Weirdly, Lara doesn't want Cabot dead, and it's soon clear why. She's got the hots for him, and she tries to convince him to team up with her. This annoys Xenos to no end, and he tries to persuade Cabot to return to Earth. Both fail to woo Cabot to the respective sides, and the alliance between Lara and Xenos gets increasingly precarious. Lara, feeling bloodthirsty after dealing with so much exhausting court intrigue, brings out all her prisoners in a gladiator-style free-for-all while taking the opportunity to stab Xenos right in the gut. This ends up being her undoing because Watney uses the public forum to denounce her as the murderer of Milanus, which, considering she just killed her head priest in front of everyone only minutes before, seems pretty plausible. The bounty hunter, who apparently hung around to watch the festivities, decides this declaration is good enough reason to switch loyalties and promptly chucks a spear straight at Laura's abdomen. So, even though at this point it would make more sense for the bounty hunter to be made the actual hero of the movie, the camera turns its attention to a post-coital Cabot and Telena, the new king and queen of Koroba. Cabot's ring then starts glowing, and there's a suggestion he's about to be swept back to Earth, but instead it's Watney that ends up in the middle of traffic in an unnamed metropolitan city. Ho ho ho.
And meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, in the prologue, Gypsy cautions against the dangers of fun as Mike roughhouses with the boys. It doesn't end well for Tom, just like the Gypsy woman said. Come the invention exchange, the Mads invent a time machine, which is a flimsy excuse for cosplay. Mike and the bots have invented Fabio? Yes, they've got a whole kit consisting of fake chins, pecs, and wigs. Fake pigeon, or whatever large bird flew into Fabio's face, not included. In our first break from the movie, the bots find Mike's old scrapbook and get him to regale us about his acting career. It involves a lot of sailor suits. Next, a musical number. Mike and the bots sing an ode to all the skin present in this film, and indeed most sword and sorcery movies. It's tubular boobular joy.
It's breastica, bubical, chestica, mammical, pendular, globular fun.
Flashical, orbital, moundulus, scoopula?
Righto, that's the one.
The highlight of the segments is the penultimate one, as the boys read from Palance on Palance, believe it or not, Palance's diaries about the making of such films as, Outlaw, and, more importantly, Tango and Cash. There are a lot of missed calls. The epilogue wraps things up with a montage of buffalo shots from today's movie. Meanwhile, in Deep 13, the Mads present the history of dance way before YouTube did the same. This has always been on kind of your top 5 mountain of episodes, has it not?
It has, yep. It was long one of my favorites. It's one that I use a lot to introduce people to the concept of MST3K. I haven't watched it for a long time, though, so it was interesting to come back to it. And I have to say, at least in my opinion, it really holds up. I mean, I have a soft spot for these sword and sandal movies. I think their goofiness just makes natural fodder for what the best brains guys are trying to get done. And I just find the riffing to be really clever, really sharp, really observant, and just the kind of pacing that I'm looking for. I was trying to figure out what it is that makes for good riffing for me, and I think it's when they go beyond the dialogue and the characters and actually like talk about shots and talk about setting and all of that stuff. And they really paid a lot of attention to that, like the cheapness of the sets and like the weird decisions. Like I don't even know what to point out. Their Jack Palance impressions are always really good. My favorite is at the point where he's making a poison and it gets all steamy. It's like, then some plain old dry ice for effect. Like it's just
yes, that was probably my favorite riff of the episode. That or since this is coming so close off of his Oscar speech, somebody in the theater when the priest Palance is interacting, I think with Cabot, someone chimes in with a Palance like, "Well, he crapped bigger than me."
Or like just how they're always paying attention to the goofy headwear in this movie. And at some point, like Jack Palance is wearing like a weird getup, and he just has a moment where he looks like he's thinking, and they take that opportunity to be like, oh, "My seed pod is blossoming." It's just really well done, and I know some people get annoyed by all the jokes about the butt shots and how much flesh is on display, but I feel like it has a joyous feel to it. Like there's no judgment. They're just like, wow, there's a lot of butts.
Because after all, the song in the segment is the tubular boobular joy.
That's a thing too. They're good segments. They're not all. I found the Jack Palance one to be actually the weakest, but the rest.
Oh man, that killed me.
Really?
Missed call.
What is missed call?
Missed call is not making it to your call time, so being late.
Okay.
And the idea that Jack Palance is perpetually late, largely, I think, because of how he may be drowning his sorrows of being on films like Outlaw and Tango and Cash, that just killed me every time. And that was probably the thing I remember most from the movie was Palance on Palance. And I totally missed the joke until this most recent rewatch that it was subtitled "Believe It or Not." Or at least I didn't remember it. Yeah, when I collected a handful of seasons of MST3K on VHS, I got season 5, and season 5, like I keep going back to it, is like, season 5 I still think is like one of the perfect seasons of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a lot of ways it's the best one to sit down and watch kind of cover to cover, because you've got 12 Joel episodes and 12 Mike episodes, and most of them are really strong. And not only are they strong, but they're usually some of the strongest in the series. Season 5 is just really good all around. And I think this episode holds up. I think it's really fun. And it reminds me, also quite favorably of Cave Dwellers, which is another episode I really, really like.
No, it reminds me of Deathstalker. It reminds me of Wizards of the Lost Kingdom. Like, just a lot of my favorites. And it's better than all the Hercules movies, too. That has that going for it. Yeah,
that's something, it's probably something we'll end up discussing one Labor Day or another. But I could just never figure out, it's like, why is it that, as much as I enjoy, wacky fantasy movies, whenever a Hercules movie is shown, it hurts. It hurts a lot.
Yeah. Whereas this one, like, it's quite entertaining. The movie isn't good, but it goes along at a fairly good pace.
And it is an entertaining movie. Let's not lie. This is a movie you could totally watch on your own if it was on cable after 12 and you had nothing better to do. It'd be a delight. And I have to say, both Donna Denton and Jack Palance, who are the baddies in this movie, are the f***ing best.
Yeah, they really are.
Just the way he delivers that line that I have never been able to forget. It's the best exchange in the entire movie. When he turns to Queen Denton and says, "You are behaving like a bitch in heat and not like a queen." Yeah. And he isn't that what prompts "Get out of here, you disgusting worm"?
That is exactly the moment.
Because you are behaving like a bitch in heat.
Whoa!
And not like a queen.
Jack, you are way off script.
Yeah.
Wow.
Get out of here, you disgusting worm.
That's the best part of the whole film. That's like, even the episode can't hold a candle to those 10 seconds. Like, that is so funny.
So this is a very fun movie that came out of a really drecky place.
Oh boy. Yeah, so what exactly are the origins of the comedy stylings of Cabot and Costello?
It was spawned out of what I understand was a quite popular series in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Very Conan the Barbarian-esque series written by a man named John Norman.
Good barbarian name.
Yeah. And it was very popular in its day. It was really part of that whole thing that you got in the 70s where like weird barbarians and sword and sandal fantasy really became a thing. So John Norman is actually a pen name. The man's real name is John Lange. And he was actually a professor of philosophy at City University of New York.
Ooh, the Barbarian of Cooney.
Yeah, and these books are really controversial now.
Is it over the standard who would win in a fight? Would it be Gore, or would it be, or Cabot, I should say, or Kull the Conqueror, or Conan the Barbarian, or Red Sonja?
Well, I'll give you basically the setting of these books. So the idea is that Gore is a planet that runs in parallel orbit to Earth. So it's always on the other side of the sun, which is why we never see it. And these weird alien species have seeded Gore with human beings, but they've placed certain restrictions on them, so they live like kind of barbarian lifestyles. But this is all of a piece to basically focus on John Lange's modus operandi, which is the natural and inevitable sexual submissiveness of women.
Are we not sure that this book series was ghostwritten by Dave Sim?
People say that, and a lot of people who are fans of the series, and weirdly enough, they were all like horny teenagers when they got into it. So coming from a place of defensiveness a lot of times, but they say at first that was only just like kind of a side sprinkle, and then as the series went on, it became more and more overt.
Yeah.
But I perused, unfortunately, the first one, and it's there from the get-go. It's actually kind of disturbing because not just this Gore series, but this man's entire oeuvre just basically seems to be about pushing the idea that women are natural slaves. It's really gross.
So if we were to read the Gore book that Gore 2, aka Outlaw of Gore, is based on, then the line would be, "You are behaving like a queen and not a bitch in heat."
Exactly. That's the weird thing about these movies, and apparently one of the reasons why fans of the series are not big fans of the movies is the movies are anti-slavery, which the books are not.
Yeah, because Cabot tries to help out that lady.
Yeah, exactly. And there is a Tarl Cabot in the series, but at first he makes some noise about, oh, this isn't right to have women enslaved, but he gets into it pretty quickly.
It becomes his thing. Oh, that's funny.
And like the more I looked into this guy, the more I was just like, wow, the confidence of like a mediocre white man in like mid-century, because he's a philosophy professor at CUNY. That's quite the feather in the cap. As far as I can tell, he was a middling academic. He had like one book in the 70s that was about, all these philosophers are good at pointing out bad things in other philosophers, but they do it too. Isn't that interesting? Like it's just such an academic sleight of hand. As far as I can tell, he never made any more impact in academia after that. He's a Nietzschean. That's all you can say. So so he's really espouses the naturalness of dominance and hierarchies, but I'm not kidding, where he has an idée fixe about women being natural submissives. There's a very disturbing article from 2011 that has an extensive interview with him where he actually calls women animals.
Whoa. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the most disturbing thing is, it's not disturbing so much as expected. Most of the people in the comments have no problem with that.
And they're like, what animals? Rare. Well, that's something that I've been curious about. Like, is it one of those things where with Gore fans, because I have never picked up a Gore book. I'd always planned on reading, say, the Conan books and stories, but I wanted to find out what order they're in, because that's very confusing, and not a lot of publishers have done that, and the few that have put out like the deluxe editions that cost an arm and a half. So I haven't even read the good version of this, let alone the also ran. But I'd always been curious, like with knowing this about gore, and I only found out about this through the Something Awful website, where someone did an extensive bit about what gore is like. I'd always been curious. It's like, is there something of value to these books in much the same way that you can enjoy a lot of H.P. Lovecraft? It's just that it's like, watch out for that N-word. It's going to show up every once in a while, like a jump scare.
No, I think...
Or what?
I think fans of the series often try to present it that way, but it is the whole point. There's a repeated trope where women from Earth are brought into gore and humiliated and tortured and sexually harassed, and they always end up really liking it. So that's just something that keeps getting returned to. Now, what the Something Awful article, which is from the early 2000s, I think, they're mostly focusing on the kind of BDSM community that came out of it. And I have less of a problem with that, because I have to assume that everyone involved is consenting. And that's, I think, the difference. If this was just about this man getting out his kink, I would be like, fine, that's fine. But he's turned his kink into a moral philosophy. Like, he genuinely believes that this is how society should be run. And that is not cool. The Something Awful forum has that very 2000s nastiness where they just, weird people deserve to be shit on as opposed to just let them be. I have heard that the BDSM community are not fans of Gorians, that they're kind of the Ayn Rands of the BDSM community, but I have no proof of that. Group. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the more I find out about this series, the more I like that the movie exists almost in contradiction to it.
Yeah, it's interesting when someone's weird beliefs, like how entangled they are in what they wrote. Because I mentioned Dave Sim earlier. A lot of people liked Cerebus. I had a friend of mine who was a big fan of it, who grew just more and more disillusioned. He was reading it as it was coming out, but catching up with, say, a decade or more of the book at that point, and then just got heartbroken by the sharp turn that its creator did with his whole philosophy of lights and voids, which was his take on the genders. The two genders, light and voids. That's Dave Sim for you.
Yeah.
But by contrast, I mentioned Lovecraft. And as weird as that, even though because you have characters who are explicitly racist, or even H.P. Lovecraft's cat, who has an unfortunately racist name, is a character in some of his stories, which is weirdly both repugnant and charming, is that despite that point of view being in what he writes, that point of view is ultimately undermined by everything he's written, because the point of every H.P. Lovecraft story is that human foibles don't matter. We're all going to die horribly. And that's the appeal of his work.
That's just it. Like, I'm not somebody who immediately dismisses an art form because I don't like the message, right? Like, I like Lovecraft too. Hell, I love a lot of Polanski movies, but
you don't want to know what his cat was named.
John Lange does not deserve that, because he's not a good enough writer. Frankly, he's not a deep enough thinker. He's not a good enough writer. His writing is ridiculously ponderous and trying to be kind of imitative of the Bible, in terms of it's kind of leaden seriousness. I'll put up on the show notes, but somebody made a parody of the way he writes, and it's called...
Isn't that Houseplants of Gore?
Yeah, Houseplants of Gore. And if you read that, you basically get the sense of the repetitiveness and the flatness, and just like it's not good writing.
I just like the pull quote for the book review column that you would have in an alternate universe for reviewing the Gore books. Gore is snore.
I love it.
Comes the headline. But yes, as we've talked about, this is Gore 2, Gore in the Big City. And I think for a lot of people, the first film is relatively unknown. And really the only reason we know this delightful film is because it was featured on the show, and it is like the perfect cheesy film to plant down at MST3K.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's a whole other gore out there, ready to be watched. Is it possible, just as they return to Ator for this most recent season of MST3K, will we see Gore 1 on the new series?
I don't think so.
Oh.
Weirdly enough, these two films were filmed together. They did it all at a moment. I wouldn't have guessed because they look and feel very different.
Well, that's because they had different directors.
Well, that would do it. I didn't even catch that. The first one is not even good enough for MST3K. It's too slow. I think it's trying to pick up a lot more of John Lange's ponderous prose, so it has a very kind of serious, leaden feel to it. It is not shot as well, although you can see all the same sets, so that's kind of fun, but they're shot in a very different way. Weirdly enough, they don't look like they're speaking English, and it's been fully redubbed. So that's a bit of a weird fake too. And the voiceover work is very bad. Like Telena, for instance, has a completely different woman doing the voice, which is a bit strange.
Whoa, really?
Yeah, it's very odd. But Palance is using his own voice again, which is weird. But the makeup's different. The lighting is a lot darker and redder and harder to make out. Like, I feel like they were going for much more of a Conan vibe. It's also more overtly sexist in that our hero, Tarl Cabot, starts off as a beta cuck who gets his TA that he's dating stolen from him. And when he comes back from Gore, having been appropriately masculinized, he punches that guy in the face and gets the girl back.
So essentially, he is the kid who has sand kicked in his face at the beach, and he returns with big muscles.
That's exactly it.
To said beach. Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, it's a weird movie. It actually makes the second movie look even better in comparison, because our second movie is just so much fleeter and funnier and goofier, and yeah, makes me appreciate it all the more.
That's why we always see Outlaw listed there along with Godfather 2 and Empire Strikes Back as one of those truly great sequels that outdoes the original.
It just had a better crew, I guess.
Well, that just might be the magic of the second director, John Bud Cardos. And this Bud's for you.
Nice.
Because Cardos is a guy who had a really, really interesting career. We mentioned him a little bit because he directed, I guess, a movie that was touched on the more recent season. We got another dose of Cardos, but not Gore, because he directed The Day Time Ended. Wait,
that's the stop motion one where there's some butt ugly aliens who chase some horses around. Yes, that's a good one.
It's a little bit City Slickers and it's a little bit Laser Blast.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way I can sum up that movie. That came to us from John Bud Cardos, and Cardos had a super interesting career. As we mentioned on that episode, one of his earliest things that he did was he was the bird wrangler on Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
Oh, really? Those are some creepy birds. He did a good job.
Yeah, no one wrangles a bird quite like John Bud Cardos. And he spent decades in the industry doing almost everything. I was looking up some of his more recent credits, and I saw that he was working, again, like a fairly menial, non-glamorous job. He was working as a driver and transportation head on films like Memento and Secretary in the early 2000s and late 90s. And how amazing it must be to work in Hollywood, even on not like medium budgeted movies like that. Mm-hmm. And you just walk over to the driver and you say, "Hey, what's your story? What did you do, old man?" And he's like, "Well, I directed a movie where my job was to put the bucket of spiders on William Shatner." Because he directed Kingdom of the Spiders.
Nice.
But Cardos, his career is insane. And I'm so glad this was included. So we were talking a little bit. There's a number of special features on the Shout Factory release of this episode. And this is one of those, there's so many features, just because I guess there's so much to tap into with both the movie and book series of Gore, that it's loaded with extras. One of which is an interview with Cardos, and he seems so humble and and kind of surprised that he has made a career in the racket that is Hollywood for this long, but you can't help but love the guy.
Okay.
Yeah, he was born 29. He's the son of a Greek immigrant, and he got his start because he was in Hollywood. He would start off as a day player, so there's a ton of uncredited roles for him as a kid.
Huh.
And yeah, so he's in like Henry Fonda westerns and Shirley Temple movies, and he's apparently in some Eddie Cantor films, and there's like no record of it on IMDb. And even when asked in an interview I read, he says, like, I think my father had some paperwork for that stuff, but that's long gone now. So he has no idea how many movies he's been in. And from there, he went on. He did some work for Hitchcock, as I said, and then after his day player and Hitchcock days were behind him, he got involved as a stuntman in movies.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And when you see him in his prime, it's like, oh, obviously, because he's like this tall, kind of strapping dude. So, this is a guy who could take a fall and could also be used as like a heavy in smaller parts in movies. And indeed, he has some acting credits where he is sometimes just credited as Thug.
Bud the Thug.
Yes. And so he worked his way up, like doing all of these different jobs. So he was doing stunt work. He was eventually he became so knowledgeable about how a smooth production should go that he became a production manager on a bunch of lower budgeted films, just because he was kind of an expert on keeping costs low and getting all the shots that you need at the day, which is an invaluable skill.
It seems to be. People who seem to last in this business, like we've talked a lot about directors who are maybe not the best artists, but they can stretch a dollar, and that's important. Yeah.
Oh, I should ask you, who do you think was the first director to hire him as a production manager?
Roger Corman.
Oh no, he should be so lucky. Arch Hall Sr.
Really? From EGA?
Yes. He did a film. He did a film called that Arch Hall directed called Deadwood 76, which I assume is about Al Swearingen getting immortality and robot legs or something. I don't know what the hell that's about. But yeah, he did some Western for Arch Hall Sr., and he did some stunts for that as well. And then he just kept on operating in those fields a lot in the 60s and 70s. So stunts and production manager when he could. He worked for Al Adamson, who was an even worse filmmaker than Arch Hall Sr., if you can believe it. Never been featured on MST3K yet, but a director who frequently employed John Carradine in his later years.
Oh,
so
okay. So
get you a sense of, you've seen the kind of movies John Carradine was agreeing to. Imagine the ones MST3K didn't show.
Oh boy, well, something for the future, hopefully.
But from Cardos's perspective, or at least the perspective I would take from that, it's like, it doesn't matter that you're on this movie. You're working with John Carradine early in your career after working with Hitchcock and everybody else, and he continues on. He did a biker movie with Jack Nicholson that was called Hell's Angels on Wheels. And he was the stunt guy for that. Okay. And he was the stunt coordinator, I believe. So they roped actual Hell's Angels to be stunt guys in the movie. And surprisingly, no one was killed.
Yeah, you'd think the stunts would be slightly better in this movie. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a fun movie. Stunts are pretty bad.
Well, his Hell's Angels days were behind him at that point. There's another movie I have to mention. So, as I said, he's rising up. He's working with Poverty Row filmmakers and of that time. And he also gets involved with Dick Clark.
Really?
Yeah, doing production work and sometimes some acting work and a bunch of different things for him. And then he gets involved in second unit directing. But I think just adding to the weirdness of his career and how John Bud Cardos is kind of this Zelig of Hollywood is he worked on a film called The Female Bunch. And The Female Bunch, which is this kind of modern day Western about sort of women taking over this ranch. I have not seen the film, though it does have the amazing tagline, "Turning women's lib into a menacing reality."
What'd I tell you? 60s, man.
Yeah, it was shot in 1969, and that's key here, because it was shot at the Spawn Ranch.
Spawn Ranch?
Yeah, and that means, do you know who worked on that movie? Because he would have been at the Spawn Ranch in 1969.
This wasn't Manson, was it?
It was.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah. Oh, dear.
John Boyd Cardos, if nothing else, he seems to have done nothing amazing in terms of making a movie. Like, his directorial efforts are entertaining. I mean, the day time ended certainly has its moments. Outlaw of Gore is a lot of fun. Kingdom of the Spiders is pretty funny to watch at 12 in the morning with friends. And he himself seems pretty lovable, but the directing didn't really last that long. He did about a decade and a half, close to 2 decades of directorial work, and he talks a bit about this movie, and the main takeaway from it is this: the 2 leads, namely Cabot and his little person sidekick. Mm-hmm. They were very difficult.
Really?
Yes, because they had bonded with the original director and his original vision for Gore. Mm-hmm. And John Bud Cardos wanted to make a fun movie, and they fought him on it. And on the other hand, he said that both Donna Denton and Jack Palance were dreams to work with.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, because they're like the best people in this movie by far.
It shows. And he said Jack Palance was a total pro. He did his job, and he was good to work with. And yet, because Cardos had worked with Palance earlier in his career, as such, the 2 were buddy-buddy, even though Palance was cast possibly before even Cardos was signed on to direct Gore 2. He asked Palance, like, why are you doing a sword and sorcery movie? You're not interested in these kinds of movies. And Palance flat out had no answer. He seemed he just did it for the money, and it was a free space. So he thought, why not? So Palance was there, but nobody had any idea why.
Whoa!
I love that in the DVD feature, Cardos's polite takeaway from the film is, it wasn't my cup of tea. What a guy.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for Shallow 13. 13 disgusting worms about Outlaw of Gore and this episode of MST3K. Go Adam, go.
Outlaw of Gore was presented by Cannon Films, which at this time was run by that celebrated duo, Golan and Globus. Unfortunately, Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus didn't produce this film, so you'll have to wait until we cover Alien from LA to hear us talk in depth about their adventures in movie making. While you wait for that, check out not just 1, but 2 documentaries about the Go-Go Boys, one of which is titled The Go-Go Boys, that we have a link to in our show notes.
Instead of the Go-Go Boys, this film was produced by Avi Lerner and Harry Allen Towers. Towers also produced The Castle of Fu Manchu, Misdeed in Season 3. Towers had an interesting life. In 1961, he was charged with running a, quote, call girl racket in New York, which kept him out of the U.S. until matters were settled in 1980.
Doesn't stop there. Towers' then-girlfriend, Mariella Novotny, claimed to the FBI that Towers was a Soviet spy. And there were also allegations that he had tried to set up a session of grown-up fun times between Novotny and President John F. Kennedy. Now, these are all just allegations, but do they sound like the actions of a man who would take an interest in the Gore novels?
Jack Palance is an insectoid! The Priest Kings, who are the baddies in the Gore movies, are actually a race of insect-like aliens in the novels. They apparently transplanted the humans from Earth onto the Gorian planet, allowing advanced architectural, agricultural, and medical skills while forcing them to remain primitive in transportation, communication, and weaponry. Why did they set up this alternative world of human barbarians? Why not?
Urbano Barberini Riaria Sforza Colonna di Sciarra, known to you and me as Cabot, is an Italian actor with a long list of movies behind him, including several horror films by Dario Argento. More recently, he had a role in the James Bond film Casino Royale. Remember to take a shot every time you hear someone shout, Urbano Barberini Riario Sforza Colonna di Sciarra.
We've got another Playboy playmate in this movie, Rebecca Ferrati, who plays Cabot's love interest Helena. She was Playmate of the Month in June 1986, only 31 years after our last Playmate, the Violent Years star Jean Moorhead. The Playmate is such a gross word.
Donna Denton, seen here as the treacherous Lara, was best known to viewers from the 80s Mike Hammer revival with Stacy Keach. Once an episode, Hammer would encounter a mysterious and breathtaking woman whom he never gets a chance to talk to. With nary a line of dialogue and beauty as her only characterization, Denton's character was dubbed The Face.
Outlaw of Gore was filmed in apartheid South Africa, including what is today Namibia. South Africa was incredibly cheap to film in and had the deserts and mines for film locations. Of course, filming there meant supporting racist apartheid policies and the risk of being blacklisted by the film industry because of that support. But most of the actors and producers weren't overly concerned about that.
And yet, Mike and the Bots make a lot of jokes about the Italianness of this movie. This movie has all the trappings of an Italian sword and sorcery film and an Italian lead actor. But in the final scene, when Watney is transported to our world, it is almost certainly filmed in Johannesburg. The storefronts are in English, and you can see the cars have a distinctive T at the end of the license plates, indicating the Transvaal, now Gauteng, province.
As the King of Koroba wanders into a gaggle of dancers, crowing tones,
Now I'll coronate the Dingling sisters.
he's doing an impression of Dean Martin, who had his own variety show for a few years in the 70s. The Dingling sisters were a quartet that would sing and dance around Martin, often in highly complex choreographies and wearing matching glitzed-out costumes while being periodically pawed at by the veteran Rat Packer.
Crow rips the seemingly random phrase,
Don't crush that dwarf, hand me those pliers.
Don't Crush That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers is the name of the third and perhaps most ambitious album by avant-garde comedy group The Firesign Theatre. Apparently the title refers to passing a nearly extinguished marijuana cigarette. Surprise, surprise, the album is from 1970.
Meanwhile, in the 1940s, the time-traveling Dr. Forrester notes that he's pruning his victory garden. These were not gardens planted to celebrate the Allies' victory in WW2, but were vegetable, fruit, and herb gardens planted at private residences and public parks during the war to help alleviate pressure on the public food supply. Besides indirectly aiding the war effort, these gardens were considered a morale booster in that gardeners could feel empowered by their contribution to the fight.
Outlaw was also the first movie shown in the Turkey Day 2015 Marathon, the third iteration of Shout Factory's Turkey Day Marathon, and the one that coincided with the Bring Back MST3K Kickstarter campaign. It's too bad that call to fans never ended up going anywhere. Sad, really.
And that's time.
Beth, I have to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to ever figure out the legend of Curly's Gold?
How long has it been since I've seen City Slickers? It's a good movie. It's pretty cute.
Here's a sad admission. I have never seen the original City Slickers, but I have frequently seen City Slickers 2, The Legend of Curly's Gold.
I seem to recall it was a pretty fun sequel.
Yeah, and at the time, I don't know if this is still true, but at the time I considered it an upgrade that Bruno Kirby was gone and the comedy stylings of John Lovitz were put in his place.
Yeah, that was his first Oscar was for City Slickers, right?
Yeah, and from what I know of City Slickers, I mean, he is perfectly cast. It's a bit of stunt casting in that you have Jack Palance playing a salty rancher, not a jolly rancher.
Yeah, I think I forget who said it, but it's just like his face was so perfect for the role. They just need somebody whose face looked like a leather saddlebag. And
no one's leatherier than I nearly said Lance Henriksen, who is arguably as leathery. But very few people are as leathery as Jack Palance.
So maybe some background. He got started in the 50s. His real name is Vladimir Polashnyuk.
Where did you find that out, by the way? I should ask.
I think that's Wiki.
Oh, well, I found that out because of his Oscar speech. Yeah. Did you ever see that Oscar speech?
I don't really watch the Oscars, so no, I have not.
Oh, it's and it's online. Like the official Oscars YouTube channel has it on YouTube, and it's well worth watching. It was frequently commented on at the time as if it was this insane flame out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so if you hadn't watched it, you would be left with the impression that Jack Palance lost his goddamn mind up there.
It's like he was having an Obama chair moment, or what?
Yeah, where it's like, oh, he's a little too off script. But no, if anything, he's just really charming. But he's clearly like not operating from a script up there, which to me is kind of great. He basically went up, he accepted his award, and he said to the audience, it's like back in the early days, I went by Vladimir. And so that was the first time. It never occurred to me, because in a weird way I always thought it's like, well, Jack Palance is as American as apple pie because of his other roles, which we'll talk about in a bit. But yeah, all he did was he went up there, he made a few jokes, and he did, and how long it took him. He talked about how long it took him to get to this point where he is accepting Academy Award, and as kind of a jokey way, it's like he went to show off how he was still in shape. Mm-hmm. So he did push-ups, and they did one-handed push-ups, which the audience is like eating up.
Right.
They're applauding it. You can see like Demi Moore is utterly charmed by this in one of the reaction shots. And he even gets to make a weird, goofy dad joke in that after he's done his push-ups, it's like, it's usually more fun with a girl there. Anyway. It goes on. It's a delight, but this got written up as if he was having a bonkers episode, when he's, in fact, it's like, oh, this guy's full of energy. But best of all, it is an Oscar speech without a single sentimental moment in it. Mm-hmm. It is just Jack Palance ruling for about 3 minutes, and he doesn't thank a single person. And it's like, I already liked Jack Palance, but rewatching that, I was like, oh no, I love Jack Palance.
Yeah, I mean, he has a bit of a legend, which I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around, because I basically know him from his MST3K roles, because he's also in Angel's Revenge, and he's equally fun as like an evil drug dealer there. And I've never seen Tango and Cash.
Oh God, it's one of those rare movies that's not just the perfect movie for MST3K, but it's also, Beth, coincidentally, and somewhat as a contradiction, it is also the perfect movie.
I have heard that.
It's the most entertaining film, and I mean, Tango and Cash is a whole story of itself. But part of its appeal is that the people making it, some people clearly thought they were making a comedy, and some people clearly didn't. And in fact, there seems to be a bit of a split between Kurt Russell and Sylvester Stallone as to who was making a comedy, because Kurt Russell is definitely in a comedy.
I have heard it, and I'm saving the moment. Like, I don't want to watch it on my own or with my husband. I feel like this has to be like a crowd thing that I see Tango of Cash for the first time. Mm-hmm. So I'm holding on to it.
He's delightful in it. Mm-hmm. But he is, of course, Jack Palance is the archetypal bad guy because of Shane.
Right, yes, he was nominated for Academy Award for that way back in 1953. Mm-hmm. And when I read, he is basically Western villainy incarnate.
Which is weird. I'm so much more of a fan of the spaghetti westerns than the American westerns, that when I think of evil incarnate, I'm like, but Jack Palance looks nothing like Lee Van Cleef.
Right.
Even as much as I find both the novel Shane and the movie Shane to be real husks of corn, every moment Jack Palance is on screen, it is a fantastic movie. He is gold. He is Curly's gold whenever he's on screen in that picture.
Yeah, and he seems to evolve so perfectly into the villain of the 70s, which is the slick drug dealer. Which seemed to be a lot of his other roles. Yeah,
I believe he's a slick drug dealer in Tango and Cash.
He just had such a good look for a villain. I found an earlier shot of him when he was much younger, and he still has like this steely glare, like he's made to be an evil guy. It's perfect.
Yes. One of my favorite movies of his is a 1980s film called Alone in the Dark, in which a series of criminally insane men get loose from a hospital during a thunderstorm and chase after one of the resident therapists of that institution. And the madmen are the madmen of note are Martin Landau and Jack Palance kind of trying to out-ham each other, but they're also followed by the head of said institution, which is Donald Pleasance as the equally insane therapist who is their ward.
Oh my god! I was going to ask if he ever did anything with your favorite dude.
Oh man, Alone in the Dark is a first-class ham-off and an entertaining movie to boot.
Well, we've sold off all of our slave women. I think it's about time we wrap things up for this particular marketplace. What we got for Chris's final factoid?
So I have a fun story to tell. So you mentioned early on in the episode that John Norman, the author of the Gore novels, worked his day job as a professor of philosophy at the City University of New York. And I'll add here that it's specifically at Queens College, one of the many universities that make up the City University of New York system. And I know that because I was a student at Queens College. In fact, I was a student at Queens College when I first watched this episode when it first came out in 1993.
Oh.
And I was even taking philosophy courses. So I had to figure out where the heck my transcript was to see if I could confirm or deny whether I had actually taken a philosophy class from John Lange. And my transcripts didn't say. So I had to then Google a picture of him and say, did he look familiar or not? And he did not look familiar. So I'm sad to report that I did not take a class with John Lange and learn his intriguing take on philosophy. But more importantly, I didn't do it immediately after watching this episode, and I didn't know enough to make the connection between the two. I mean, I wonder if anybody ever brought it up in class. I wonder if he watched the episode, right? Like, I don't know.
Believe it or not, Lange did not like the MST3K treatment.
What?
Does he think he could do a better job riffing the movie?
Well, this is just it. Does he really strike you as the kind of man who can be...
has a sense of humor?
Yeah. Well, this doesn't surprise me, Chris. You don't seem to me as somebody who would take Nietzschean philosophy as a focus. Although I don't even know what he taught. That just seems to be like his main scope. But yeah, I think you actually, even though it would have been fun for the pod, you kind of dodged a bullet there.
I don't think I would have been converted to his way of life, but it is probably for the best.
Although you totally could have told him that if he was getting out of line, that he was behaving like a bitch in heat and not like a queen.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you've got information about what order to read the Conan books in so Adam can start doing that, or if you'd like to ask Beth and Adam anything, just get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you. For as little as $1 an episode, you can help us research and record this show. You can listen to all our superfan bonus bits, including bloopers, chit-chat, sometimes entire segments that didn't quite make the cut, but which are still fun enough to share with our most devoted fans. You can find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/52.
I think we've covered just about all that we can say about the planet Gore. So if you want to learn more about it, I suggest you subscribe to a John Lange fanzine, probably one entitled Gore Zone. Anywho, Chris, what will we be tackling next time on this very program?
Well, Adam, Beth, there's only one way to let you know about that, and it goes a little something like this.
This episode's over, so it's farewell, and maybe we'll come back to pod, who can tell. I guess there is no one to blame. The hours up. So what are we gonna watch next time? It's season 9, episode 10, The Final Sacrifice.
Applause.
I'm most impressed by the fact that you had the refrain in there. Like that. It's like, wow.
You keep giving me gifts, Chris. This is another favorite, which is surprising because I'm not usually a big fan of anything from season 9, but this is a standout.
Yeah, hey, season 9 has its moments. It certainly gave us Puma Man earlier this year.
This is
earlier
better than
this
Puma
season,
Man.
I should say.
Yeah.
No way, Puma Man is the highlight of season 9, and Final Sacrifice sucks.
Oh, we were going to have a fight.
All Pleasance makes everything better. I don't care about some dumb Canadian thing. I would never devote a podcast towards recording about such things.
Okay, well, on that note, until next time,
Get out of here, you disgusting worms.
We do need to say something about Fabio.
take it away, Theme Squad.
You are behaving like a bitch in heat and not like a queen.